Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is Dr. Selma Bartholomew from Partner with Legacy, Dr. B. Happy New Year to our audience. Thank you so much for making time to connect with us on this January 7th of the new year, 2021. Thank you for being a part of our conversation today. Stormed Capitol building, implications for the Black community and for schooling. If you have not had a chance to grab your popcorn, then do so now, because it's going to be a lively discussion, and we appreciate you calling your friends and those within your network and asking them to join us and to be a part of this conversation. I'm Dr. Bartholomew, Dr. B, President of Partner with Legacy, and we have a dynamic panel today who will be discussing the issues around race and policy and politics and relationship building in America in light of the horrific events that we all witnessed yesterday in our nation's capital. So thank you again for joining us. I want to extend to everyone first a happy new year, a prosperous new year, a transformational new year. And to ask you to please continue to stay safe, because we are well aware that we are still in the midst of a pandemic. So thank you again for joining us. So good afternoon. So let me give a context for the conversation today. So we are here today to talk about what has recently happened in our nation's capital. Yesterday, we witnessed the horrific siege and attack and chaos within our nation's Capitol building. And sadly, the reports are indicating that at least 4 lives were lost, and certainly injuries. And we saw so many people also walking around without masks. And so this certainly will have some ripple effects as people, as those protesters and terrorists and individuals go back to their communities and have now carrying this pandemic and this virus back to their community. And we all know the implications and the strain on our healthcare system. So I'm honored today to have a dynamic panel. We wanted to have a discussion that really centered on community and having an authentic and open discussion about race in light of the issue. I found this quote from Abraham Lincoln, and it says that I must stand with anybody that stands right, and stand with him while he is right, and part with him when he goes wrong. And I think that definitely gives us a context for our discussion. So let me introduce our panel members. I'll give each panel member an opportunity to introduce themselves as well, and to respond to maybe have an open reflection around what they witnessed yesterday and their initial thoughts. So I'm honored to first have the pleasure to share to this panel and this hour with a dynamic leader with more than 30 plus years of experience, a wealth of experience and wisdom in the international community. So Ambassador Eugene Purcell was ambassador for Grenada, West Indies, and has worked through international communities with international leaders. And I think brings a unique perspective to this discussion today. And certainly I have the pleasure of learning from him and his expertise. And I was so honored that he was able to grace us today with his time and to just have the opportunity to reflect openly with us about the issues that we are facing right now as a nation and as we look forward. So Ambassador Purcell, welcome and thank you for joining us. And I'll give you the opportunity to extend greetings to the audience and to share your opening statements and reflections on what has happened in our nation.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bartholomew. And let me say hi again to Derek and to Max, other members of the panel. I'm very pleased to be on a panel with you. It's an honor for me to be on such a panel. And Dr. B, I want to commend you for your leadership in organizing this very timely discussion. Yesterday, like most people, I was just looking at the debate with regards to the certification of the votes for Biden-Harris team. And when the breaking news started and I saw what this madness, I would call it, let me be honest, it was not a surprise to me. I thought I heard President Trump signaled that months ago. And so when I saw what I saw yesterday, even though I did not hear the rhetoric of his meeting prior to the storming of the Capitol, I just wasn't surprised that this would happen because he more or less made it clear that he wanted that to happen. But but at the same time, coming on the heels of a summer of national and international protests against, of course, a history of institutional racism that somewhat continues the unprovoked killing of Black people at the hands of, and of course, not only the hands, but the knees of policemen across this country. The first thing that came to my mind when I saw what was happening was the skewed execution of laws, of public policies, rules, and regulation against Black people and Black communities. That's the first thing I saw, because I knew clearly if what I was looking at was a Black group, or let's say Black Lives Matter movement, I knew that the response would have been very different. I was a bit surprised to see the lack of security. I kept looking to see, well, where is the Capitol policeman or the Capitol Police? And I could not understand, one, why they were not prepared. I know that the forces there is 2,000 large, but you knew what was going to be taking place at the Capitol yesterday. And by all means, I thought you should have beefed up security for that, because you heard Trump call for a protest. And so my first thing that caught me by surprise was, well, where's the security? The second thing was, as I said before, how skewed the execution of laws and public policies and rules and regulation is against the Black community. Because let me repeat that. What we saw yesterday resonates a profound mistrust that characterized the relationship between Black people and a white administration. No one could doubt that if it were the Black movement, Black Lives Matter movement, that did that at Capitol Hill yesterday, the reaction would have been much different. And Black people and Black communities would have been under pressure for years and perhaps centuries to come. We would not have been forgiven as a people for desecrating the the home of our senators and representatives, House representatives.
So true, Ambassador Pursu. And I think you've set the context there when you give that language of skewed justice and skewed policy. And thank you for setting the stage for this discussion. I'm honored to also our next panel members. Let me introduce Dr. Max Jean-Paul. He's a principal and educational change agent and leader within the New York City community and also the international community as well. So I'm honored because I think today we'll get a chance. Normally we're just looking locally, but I think we also have to look across the diaspora and have a broader conversation for this. Dr. Jean-Paul, without a question mark, is a champion of young people and creating a space for them for voice, for advocacy, a space to work with children and families from very diverse communities. And I'm honored to have him as part of our panel member today especially since we will also be talking about the implications of what we saw yesterday from the views for parents and also for schooling. Dr. Jean-Paul, welcome, and thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, and Happy New Year extended to you and to your family. I'll give you a moment to introduce yourself to the audience and to share your reflections from what you observed yesterday.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Bartholomew, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of such a great panel. I look forward to discussions. So Happy New Year to all of you. Once again, also Happy New Year to all of you that is tuning in to our discussion today. I'm very saddened and frustrated with what took place yesterday. As the ambassador said, there are two tales and two systems that affects America. And that was not a fair representation of me, of my children, of my parents who immigrated to this country. So it was a very poor representation. And I know that if things would be different, if things were different, if the complexion was different, the response would have been different at the Capitol Hill. So I'm very frustrated. But to move forward, it's important that how do we continue to model and use this event as a lesson, not only for us, but a lesson that will be an ongoing conversation as we move forward as a nation, but also internationally, because the state of democracy was affected yesterday. And as Ambassador said, it is screwed, and there's a lot of questions and implications that we must dive into to discuss the next steps, not only for the current generation, but also beyond.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jean-Paul. Thank you. And as we have this discussion as well, as I noted, I don't want us to just stay in the US. I want us to also make those connections on a broader scale as well. I'm honored to have Dr. Skeet, a dear member of our team. He is a professor at Medgar Evers College, author of his book, Breaking the Chains. You can find it on Amazon. And was excited to have this opportunity to get your thoughts on what happened yesterday, Dr. Skeet, and your perspective that you bring as you work with young people and mentor our young people to usher them through the halls of scholarship and to set them forth and to give them a vision for the future. And so what we saw yesterday, I want to make sure that we talk about, what did our young people see and how do we help them to make sense of that conversation? So I'm going to give Dr. Skeet a moment to introduce himself and to share, Dr. Skeet, your reflections on yesterday. What is it that came to your mind as you saw those horrific events?
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. B, and thank you to my fellow panelists, and I'm happy to be here today, and Happy New Year to all. I want to start by saying that yesterday's event was very disturbing, and disturbing is an understatement to say the least, because what we saw was not a true representation of the democracy that we know. I mean, I'm reminded of Ray Charles when he sang that song, America, America the Beautiful. That's the America that we know. That's the America that our young people are supposed to feel good about, not the America that we saw yesterday. And yes, Ambassador Pusu, you are absolutely correct. We saw a skewed operation yesterday. The way in which the white terrorist thugs were treated by the police versus the way in which the black folks were treated. We saw in this past summer here, there's a lot of uprising, a lot of protesting. And of course, we saw the labeling of these protesters by the president. He used every negative adjective he can use to describe these protesters, some of them peacefully. And of course, yet still they were labeled as thugs. Yesterday they were labeled as terrorists and, Antifa and all these other names that we used to label these guys. And yesterday when he spoke, "Oh, I love you," and going home in peace, which of course is total hypocrisy, when he was the one that instigated this mob of terrorists who went and invaded the people's house that we call the Capitol. And of course, we saw the way in which the police used a standoff approach, because again, when it comes to white folks, they don't feel as though that they should fear the police. The police were just there taking selfies with some of them. So for them, this was just a regular day. They would, in fact, I hardly saw any riot gear in terms of what happened. They were pushing against the police, and yet still they had a softball approach. So we're saying, so what lessons did our young people learn from this? They saw that there's a tale of two Americas. There's America that deals with how to deal with white folks in these type of issues, and there's America how to deal with black folks in similar circumstances. And I would say to young people in particular, do not try to emulate the behavior of these white thugs that we saw yesterday in the Capitol.
Mhm.
Do not believe that you could do the same thing and they can get away with it. We saw what happened to Timmy Rice, young kid with a toy gun. Less than 2 seconds, a police officer jumped out of his vehicle and killed Timmy Rice. 2 seconds, right? Now, yesterday we saw folks literally who were pushing back against police officers, white folks who were literally ransacking the people's house, the privacy, and yet still, they all walked away for the most part. Now, the question I'm asking is this. We saw what took place yesterday. The world saw what took place yesterday. What if there were spies that were in that crowd who planted cameras and different devices in the halls of Congress, in the offices of these senators and these representatives? And who knows what's there right now? We have no idea. So, of course, we have to do a thorough check in the people's house based on what transpired yesterday, all because of mendaciousness by the leader, their leader, Trump, and other enablers who also enabled what transpired yesterday. And of course, when Trump spoke yesterday and others, they were talking about going and marching towards Capitol Hill.
Yes.
At the same time, while that occurred, part of the burden was on the Capitol Police. And there was definitely a breach. They have a lot to answer for, because like everyone says before, we knew in advance what was happening. There was the Proud Boys and some of these other rogue terrorist organizations were talking about what they were doing, how they were coming to the Capitol even with guns. And at the same time now, we saw a paltry approach to security. That is, there's no words to say when it comes to that. So I would say then that they also have a lot to answer to, not only the Metropolitan Police, Department of Homeland Security as well, who should have ensure that the security around the Capitol was beefed up and not allow something like this to happen. This was a shame for America. This was a stain on American democracy. And we do not have the standing to go any part of the world and talk about democracy when it comes to what is taking place in developing countries, because we have stood lower. The thugs that encroach into people's house need to be arrested and charged as based on the sedition laws, simply because this was not a good look for us in this country.
Thank you.
As you say that, Derek, I agree with you.
Another direction, though, and I fully agree. And what I saw yesterday, I think, as I echo Ambassador Pursuit, I was not surprised. I was hurt and absolutely shocked and angered by it. But what really hit me was from the perspective of an educator. I was shocked to see our senators having to be in rooms and having to use chairs to blockade doors. And I was literally, chills came over me, because I know we have had so many school shootings in this country, right? We've had Columbine. And to see that the rhetoric, right, of, oh, we care, and we should have an agenda around terrorism, and we have an agenda around safety, but they were our senators and our leaders, and they were not safe. And it was clear that there really was no plan. And so certainly Trump has lit the match. He has lit the match. But we cannot now turn a blind eye. We have to now look honestly and say, well, wait a minute. If you're the senator and you're under attack and you're put in a chair, what about our children in our schools? What about, those issues of terrorism and things around the safety of our children, which they've ignored, right? They've ignored gun legislation and all of these issues. And yes, Derek, you're raising the issue about a broader issue around spies and things like that. So I think this issue goes way deeper, than Trump. And I think that it's been a game of let's pretend. There's been trillions spent on homeland security, and literally they were breaking a glass door. There was nothing else. They didn't have equipment. And it just showed that the lack of solutions. And I think that it reflected to me the absence of diversity, that it's been just one set of people at the table looking at these problems, and no one questions and no one raises issue when they present solutions, and everything is okay until now, right? We see this glaring holes, and we see the disparity. So yes, there's the issue of race and equity and how we are skewed, but I think the deeper issue now is who gets to be at the table to solve these issues, and how do we begin to advocate to say that the reason why you didn't, like this lack of a contingency plan, it didn't just happen, yes, because he's in leadership, but I think that there's just a lack of diversity at the table, and the funding and the resources don't touch anybody else. And so they get a chance to just pretend that they're solutions, but they are not. I want to go back to Ambassador Pursu, because yesterday and throughout the next few days, we hear this piece around the fact that what we look like on a global stage. And I know that, Ambassador, you've worked in an international community, so I want to hear your thoughts about the implications of this. But I also heard some language yesterday that was quite disturbing, and where they compared what was happening to banana boat countries. And I absolutely took offense to that. And I'll say why I took offense after, but I want to open up the dialogue to Ambassador Pursu to maybe address the question on the implications on a global stage, and how we are now, how do you think that we are now viewed, and how do we move forward?
Right. Well, let me just go back to a point you made about feeling sort of your feelings about leaders, whether they're House leaders or senators, who had to be ducking under the tables. I want to remind you that Trump is not alone in the kinds of nonsense that has been happening for the past 4 years. He has been encouraged by some of the very senators that were in that chamber, and a lot of those in the House. So having to duck below the table may just be, it might just bring some better understanding to them of what they're exposing our children in our schools to. Maybe coming out of that, they would have greater empathy, and they may be more willing to listen about issues on gun control and these type of things, and securing children in their place of learning, and also people in their place of worship. So I am not going to make a big deal about them having to duck. Maybe, hopefully something good will come out of them having to duck. But let me go back to something I wanted to say. I wanted to touch base on the implications, as you said, and of course, those implications are numerous and they're enormous. Let me hold for a second. George, I'm on a Zoom call here. Yeah. So let me, there's something that bothers me. I know that we'll talk about the many implications, but there's one that I want to focus on, especially because it is one that is largely overlooked. I'm referring to the situation wherein in public administration or administration of public services, we as Black people often become a part of the dispensation of injustice, even to our own. I'm mindful of the book, The Invisible Man, in which the author says, too often, Black people are hurting their own and excusing it as we have to do that for our survival. And we caught up in this web of the dispensation of injustice. We sometimes get to positions and we follow suit systems that are hurting our own people. And so I'm flagging that because I think this is an issue that we are going to have to address among ourselves. You know, when we get into position, is it all about the grandeur of our office or are the interests of our people and our community? And I think a lot of our representatives have to be held, have to be asked questions in this regard.
I so appreciate that, Ambassador Pursuit. So I hear you speaking to this question of courageous leadership. And let me just welcome the audience. This is Dr. B. Thank you so much for joining us. Please make sure and like and subscribe and continue to, we hope that we are inspiring you with our talk today on the storming of the Capitol building. So I hear this, this piece around the courageous leadership within our community. So I'm going to go to Dr. Jean-Paul and ask, what are the lessons learned then in terms of leadership for our community? Are there some that you feel like stands out? Ambassador Patu is saying when they get into these positions, they have to be able to, not follow suit. So your thoughts, Dr. Jean-Paul?
Yes, thank you, Dr. B. I agree with what the ambassador is saying, but the first thing I would acknowledge is that it's important to be reflective and just take a minute for when you're speaking with students or family members, just to hear the initial reactions first, and then from there, taking down notes and so forth and process what has been done. And then from there, then you start to have a dialogue. And as I mentioned before, it's not a one-time discussion or topic, it's an ongoing conversation. In terms from the international perspective, I think it's very offensive to use the word banana boat. That has many implications, especially with my culture being Haitian, for folks to even say that, even though Haiti is the first independent nation to rise up against a lot of colonialism and so forth. I don't need to go too much into history. However, history has shows, you brought up the Invisible Man, that how you cripple a country is through economics and so forth, and we see that. But I think to move forward, I think this is a time to continue to have a conversation. And if a current administration comes in, is identifying 2 to 3 points, but hearing the voice of the people in terms of how do we move forward? Because what took place yesterday was unacceptable. It saddens me, it's frustrated, but also at the same time, how do we continue to empower our community by focusing on 2 or 3 points and then having some benchmarks to see if we're making progress? And that was the purpose of like the Black Lives movements and other movements, as it talks about, hey, just give me a chance, give me access. That's all I'm asking for. But to put a label on a group of people, to call us banana boats, or it's just unacceptable. And what took place yesterday is just unacceptable. That hurts our democracy. It's uncalled for, it's disgusting. And we've seen other models where democracy has risen, and that would never be tolerated. And like you said, Dr. B, earlier, as what we all shared, that if it was one of us, it would be a different conversation where folks would have to be planning for funerals and
yes.
Can I just say
other things, which is not cool.
Yes, go ahead, Ambassador Pursuit.
Yeah, let me say this, that I want to say this is a very tricky issue here. And here's why. I want to cite 2 sort of anecdotes that would explain why it is of concern to me. I was at a conference of Black public administrators, and we are discussing the question of, I think, a Black supervisor, a Black man acceded to the position of the superintendent of prisons in Texas. And many people feel, oh, we'll get more justice now because it's one of us. But it was the system. The system. He became even more vigilant than his former white, the former white guys. So many times, just getting a Black person there, especially if that Black person is not conscientious and pays no little attention to Black consciousness, it makes no difference. The system would swallow him up, and he would become even worse to some of us than I have had experience where it's sad. I've dealt with black Trumps, and I know black Trumps in certain institutions close to us right now. So this is not just about black faces in leadership. It is about black consciousness. It is about, and I have 5 things that I would like to just mention here with regards to responding to this sensitive issue. I was at a round table that was headed to by, what's the name that did Like It Is? You remember that show, Gil Noble?
Great show.
And as we go around the table, we got to a popular bishop in Brooklyn. And when it was his turn to speak, he said, if you can't beat them, join them. If you can't beat them, join them. So if people are practicing things that are evil to our people, and I can't beat them, I should join them. And I can't live with those kinds of advocacy. And sometimes we don't think about what is really affecting us, and we join it looking for personal deliverance or personal betterment, and we're hurting larger numbers of people, and we throw in our community back. When I sat at that meeting, what came to mind, I asked myself, given Black people's common history, the common experience that we had going back to slavery, through Jim Crow, to current institutional racism, what do we take out of that common experience as a philosophy for life? How should we be thinking as a people, given that common experience of exploitation and hurt? That is what I think is missing in our community. We are simply mimicking financially successful white people. That's why you have some Black people voting for Trump, saying he's a wealthy man, he make money. And that bothers me sometimes. And
I'm going to ask Dr. Skeet, Ambassador, to jump in, because you're asking a few questions here that I think is so important. So I hear you saying that as we look at this events and as we see the evil and that it's being perpetuated, that we have to be careful not to stand in those shoes, and to and to have the sense of, okay, now we get a chance and we should, embrace, that violence. But also, how do we have a philosophy and a mindset? So I see Dr. Skeet wanting to jump in. So Dr. Skeet, your thoughts about, this philosophy and this thought about what do we look for in terms of leadership? What do we look for, Ambassador is saying about a philosophy of a common experience to look forward. Your thoughts?
I'll just sort of peel back one layer and sort of attack the question from the issue of diversity. Now, when we look at diversity and leadership, we think of diversity just means having a Black or brown body in a room, and we claim that to be diversity. But to me, diversity has to be relational. So that's about relationships. It has to be about experiences. So you cannot bring someone into Brownsville or East New York and ask them to relate to the individuals, the parents and the students who go to school in Brownsville, who were from Central Ohio, and who doesn't understand the culture of that environment, even though they may look like the people who reside in Brownsville or East New York, as the case is. So they might not have had the same experiences or similar culture. So they may be so distant from that reality, and one may look at their being in let's say in East New York and Brownsville, and believe then that they represent and they can fit in, and they may not necessarily fit in because they look like that person, those individuals who goes to school there. So I would say first and foremost, it has to be relational and culturally sensitive, because if not, we'll just be spinning top in mud, as the case would be. When it comes to the leadership must be in an individual or individuals who's able to relate to the people that they're trying to convince, or the people that they're working with. And not just relate in the sense of a top-down approach or bottom-up approach, whereby you can listen to the voices in the community. You can listen to their pleas, listen to their cries, and at the same time, allow for your experiences and resources to sort of bring that together and for both parties to create a narrative that represents the community and at the same time represents the vision of the leader. Because if we just talk about a top-down approach from a leadership perspective, where it's just my voice or nothing at all, and nothing is going to change. However, if we bring in the voices of those in the community and we allow for them to share what they're going through, what their pains are, what their sufferings are, and at the same time to develop a narrative from your perspective as a leader, linking what they're saying, I believe then that we can get more out of the community. And as we talk about, as we move forward, we need to have these conversations. We need to have a bottom-up approach to addressing some of these issues, simply because for far too long, we see it happen, especially in some of these institutions that we're talking about, like Department of Education, etc. We see a top-down approach from the superintendent to the principals, to the teachers, to the students. And of course, many a times we ignore the voices of the individuals who we're serving, which are the students and the parents. So we need to bring them into the conversation. And as leaders, we have to be open enough to recognize that it's not just all about us. We may be leaders of the institution and guiding the process, but we have to be more inclusive. And of course, we have to be relational, because we may not be in their positions, but we have to empathize in order for us to be able to get the best out of the communities that we're serving. So in general, we're saying, if we have to tie this right back into what transpired yesterday, for example, white folks have this tendency to believe that they have the right to protest, and we just have the right to just say, at least you are in the room, so it's okay. But you don't have that voice. You don't have the same privilege and right that we have. That's wrong. Similarly, when it comes to the leadership from the superintendent's office and the chancellor's office, they would come and they would put something on the principal's desk and ask them to implement it without understanding culturally, how is this going to be implemented based on the community that I'm serving? So they may be desensitized to what the principal has to go through in that community, and believing then that because someone at the top says it's okay from some model that they took from some other community that have the resources to support that system, they think it can work in Brownsville, East New York, and most times it fails simply because they haven't taken time to build the relationships, to understand the context of what that community needs, and help the principal to grow that community rather than just imposing on them what they believe could be a success model.
Thank you, Dr. Skeet. I am going to come to you next, Dr. Jean-Paul, because I think what is important about this conversation is making the connection to what we saw yesterday. And you cannot move, we do need a relationship building, and we need an opportunity to create a space to have this conversation with our children. I'm going back to schooling. How many of our schools yesterday, when this happened, a message did a message go out and say, history is being made, stop what you're doing, stop reading about whatever it is, and let's figure out how to have a facilitated conversation with our students. I know it happens with the leaders that we work with as an organization and with our schools, because I know that our principals and our teachers take time to engender relationships, but that is not the norm, right? And there are principals and leaders who wanted to do it, but if they don't feel empowered to do it, then our children saw what happened yesterday without any debrief, without any lens to reflect on. And that creates, as Dr. Jean-Paul, you've been so honest in saying, yeah, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. So imagine now our children seeing this, right? Our children seeing that, oh, do you want to break into the Capitol and take a selfie moment? No, that's not the message we want for our children. And that's why we wanted to have this conversation today. For those who are with us, please, thank you. Please make sure you like and subscribe and continue to stay with us. Dr. Jean-Paul, I'm going back to you.
No, Paul,
talking leadership. So
thank you, Dr. B. As Dr. Skeets mentioned, and I agree with Dr. Skeets, that it's important just to continue to sit down with the community and have an honest conversation. one thing that I always encourage is having a space, like having a town hall meeting where you invite all members of the community, not only the school community, but the local bodega owner, the bus driver, all community stakeholders are important to voice their concerns about what's happening and how do they feel. And then from there, developing a plan to help execute for the youth to understand, because it's how we communicate to them. For me personally, yesterday, what I did with my staff is we had a conversation where I spoke with them about what was happening and also shared and acknowledged all the hard work of Stacey Abrams, who actually wrote a great book, which I shared, as you guys know, I'm an avid reader, about what she has done, where she didn't just settle for less. So that was a pivotal moment where the state of Georgia became blue. So that's a teachable moment right there and then. Like, why did it become blue? Why was it red all this for a long period of time? And then from there, you build on that conversation, but also you build on a conversation, which is a stepping stone. And then from there, students start to understand how democracy works. So I think that's important. But going back to my initial comment earlier, that using this time to model and teach is pivotal, based on the feedback that you get from the community about what needs to be addressed. Talk about empowerment, advocacy. How do you get involved in civic relationships and engagement? These are some things. How do you start to have a conversation with your local assembly member, your Congress member, your state senator about the implications that took place yesterday? And then how do you see that? How do you make that change? That change doesn't happen within 6 months. That change will take place within a year or two. But just to be part of that conversation, these are some things that are some points that are important when you get the community involved. And also what Dr. Skeets spoke about is, it also comes down to having that mindset and understanding, calling it what it is. What we saw yesterday was wrong. It was just clearly white supremacy. Some people say it was considered domestic terrorism, which is what happened, and it's just wrong. But taking that lesson, what happened, and then how do you turnkey it now for our children? How do we have this conversation with our parents? I had a conversation with my aunt yesterday about everything that happened. The first thing that she came to her mind, she goes, my gosh, I came to America for an opportunity, and I have never seen something like this before. Is this America? This is not the America that I know why I came. So right. How do I process this? And we had a conversation, and this is really an ongoing conversation. So just starting with that having an initial reaction, and then building upon that actually helps move, leadership. That actually helps move education, and that just helps move us as individuals to have these clear conversations with intentions, and this will help come up with some solutions and sticking to it, which is important.
But if I may say,
Ambassador Pursuit, thank you so much, Dr. Jean-Paul. So we're staying on this question of leadership, and Ambassador Pursuit, I think we may be taking for granted the fact that we've actually had the opportunity to develop our leaders. And so I was hoping that maybe you would give a context of what historically has it meant to train leaders within our communities here as well as abroad, and what may we have to do differently. So would you mind kind of giving me?
Let me say, first of all, the majority of leaders that I know failed, and they were trained.
Go ahead.
So it's what you're training them in. This is why I start with a philosophy. I don't care how much a person is certificated. I want to know something about you. I want to know about your character. That is more important than any certificate you have. So the question of training leadership, training leaders, teaching people how to follow procedures and how to dot the I's and cross the T's does not guarantee that they would lead to anything more progressive than we have. And just going back to Dr. Jean-Paul's thing, yes, this is the America. This has always been the America. What we saw yesterday, it is the America. I mean, don't forget, It was Black people in slavery that actually told America, you cannot have a slave society and a democratic society at the same time. It has been Black people who have been teaching white America to be democratic. It is us in chains that taught America you cannot have both of us. Either you have a slave society or you have a democracy. If you're going to have a democracy, we can remain in chains. So this has always been America, and they have not confessed for the sins of slavery yet. And so that's why I'm not surprised. What I don't want is Black people to emulate that. I don't want Black people to think that this is, because that's white supremacy, white privilege behavior. They have taken advantage and they have trampled on our rights so frequently in the past that now, as Malcolm X said, is coming home to roost. They've done it to us. And that's why I started off by talking about the protest movement. We have made some progress in saying stop, stop. So now they've moved from just us to themselves now. And that's why, I don't want to get away from your thing. Look, when I think about training Black leaders, I think about character education first. I don't care how much technical knowledge you have. If you don't have character, you cannot be a leader to me. And so that's what I'm saying. I'm not satisfied in the world that we really should rest back on our laurels and say, well, we know how to train leaders, or we know what we need to train leaders. You know, I saw something recently, something that was published about maybe 15, 20 years ago, is the traits. CARICOM produced something called the traits of a Caribbean person. In other words, what they would like the ideal Caribbean person to be like. And it was about 6 or 8 traits. And I wish we would have something like that in general for Black people, that these are some of the traits we'd like. I don't have it in front of me, but I can't quote it. But when I talk about a philosophy, that is what I mean. Without a philosophy that ties us together, we are going to be used. And it's easy to use us. For the right amount of money, you could get any one of us to just do things that would harm each other. This is a society. This is a capitalist society. This is how it works. But if we have to transcend that, I can never lose sight of the fact that we were enslaved by capitalism, by the lure of profit, by the lure of personal gain. This whole thing about the police, they were created to keep us in slavery. That's the birth of the police. So I'm saying when we talk about leadership, let's step back from all of what we know and look at each other differently. Let us look for different qualities on which to build leadership. I've been to...
Also, I hear you, Ambassador Pursu. I know we're talking in the context of our community, but there is a crisis in leadership, certainly, in the White House. And we saw, individuals, like Staharlo, who people claim, oh, well, yeah, you've got a degree from Stanford, or, you're highly educated. And I think that we need to be able to say that we want to have better models, right? That this is not only about, as Derek mentioned, it's diversity. And if we can define now the traits of what a leader and a steward, which is something that is, part of my work, that it's really stewardship, right? That you have, took the country to the brink and literally kicked it over the hill, or trying to kick it over, and you're not being a good steward. So I do think that, we seem to, when what we do right for our community, you're absolutely right, benefits the entire country, benefits the entire globe. And so if we can now begin to just catch our breath a minute and say, what is the nature of leadership that we want, and to, you're right, not just make the assumptions. We're thankful and we know we will have a new president-elect and president-elect vice president, Biden and Harris, but we cannot lose sight of the nature of the characteristics that we want. And I'm going to ask those who are with us, if you're listening and you have questions, please put it in the comment box, because then we can, share them with the panel members as we kind of come down to the close of our hour. Dr. Skeet, I hear you jumping in, but I want to go back a minute. I want to go back to this question in terms of the education or the economics piece. And so as you think about I'm going to go first to our young people, because you spend a lot of time mentoring young people, your book and the work that you do in terms of supporting them. Where's the policy now? What is it that we now need by way of policies to provide the support to our young people? Because it won't happen. I think certainly there is a tone where, yes, everyone in the news said, yes, this, if you were Black Lives Matter, you wouldn't have been treated in this way. But that's not why we're having this conversation today. We're having a conversation because we're looking to really think thoughtfully about our community and about our young people and what they need as they stand with us and next to us. We have to look and secure our young people and our children. So what do we do now as we look to secure our young people in this context? What would you suggest?
I'll frame it from the context of the previous question you were asking about leadership. When we think of leadership in this country or in general, we think of leadership as a function of pedigree. So we're going to say the person who went to Harvard and Stanford and Yale, we're going to give them higher prominence versus the person who went to a community college and got or local college and have a same bachelor's degree. So we give those individuals who went to these Ivy League schools more prominence because we think then that they will become better leaders. Similarly, in our education system with our young people, we put a lot of emphasis on the kids who are doing extremely well. And don't get me wrong, I would say yes, give them the support that they need and help to motivate them. However, I think then that more effort and emphasis needs to be placed on those who are in the middle tier to the bottom tier. They need the support. And quite often, we ignore that group because we think, well, they're not going to go anywhere, they're not going to do anything, so might as well ignore them. But some of these individuals turn out to be some of the best leaders. Some of these individuals turn out to be more successful than those who were on the front end while in middle school or high school. So I think what we have to do in conversations like these and in our institutions, we have to engage not just the brightest and the best in our institutions, but those who are in the middle and the bottom tier. We have to give them the support. We have to bring them to the front as well. We have to help them to see themselves, not just in the context of, well, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, but I can just the same way because I may learn differently. So if my teachers approach me with the way in which I learn, I'm able to get more out of, I can become much better. And I'm speaking from the standpoint of people that I know who were students in my classes and during my time when I was a student myself, who turned out to be more successful than the kids who are at the forefront. So when it comes to our institutions and our young people, we need to engage our young people and not just those who are at the top or the front of the line, but those who are in the middle and the bottom tier of the line as well. Because if we do so, at least we make our system, our ecosystem more inclusive and not exclusive. And there has to be that moment where that pivotal moment, as my colleague Dr. Jean-Paul spoke about, when we can recognize that every student has value and not just those who are standing to the front of the line or not those who are outperforming their peers.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Skeet. And I'm going to go to Dr. Jean-Paul next, because certainly you are also, you are a leader and do so much for the children within your schools and within the community, but you're also a dad. And so as you think about this question of, what do we do for our young people as we look forward, because they are experiencing this as well and may not have the support to filter what they are witnessing in our nation right now. And so if we can look ahead at policy and look ahead as an approach for the Biden-Harris administration, what would you want to see by way of supports for our young people?
Well, thank you, Dr. B. I would first, it's important to have an open line of communication with our youth to hear how they're feeling, how they're reacting, and allow them to express themselves, whether it's through a written form or through an artistic form. That's important. The other part I want to touch on is the looking at the social emotional aspect, because what they saw yesterday is very graphic. To see a Confederate flag in the Capitol, it really is misrepresentation. We know that systemic racism is real. It was just pretty much in their face. And asking a question, how do you feel? How do you react? What would you like to do? And just having some real simple questions and building upon that. And then from there, as I mentioned before, that it's not just a one lesson. These are multiple lessons over time in terms of conversations with our young people, and from there starting to create civic projects, engagements, and including community activists, including our senators, our assembly people, our Congress people, and part of these conversations, because every voice needs to be heard, and actually allowing them to reflect and express themselves. These are some things that are important as we continue to have these conversations with our young people, because it's mind-boggling, but it's important to call it what it is, and then from there you built upon it. Because as I started off, that it's sad, it's very frustrating. However, the next step is what do you do now? Understand the implications, but then how do we move forward? And having that solution oriented approach is helpful, because we are all scarred now. I mean, we've already been scarred, as Ambassador said. We've been scarred for many years now. We are aware of that. But how do we build and break those chains, as Dr. Skeet's books talks about? But how do we move forward individually and personally? And as I have my conversation with my two boys, I was referred to them as kings, because that's what they are. And that's why I usually tell all of my students, and not only here in the United States, but also when I'm in Haiti, that they're all kings and queens, and they can thrive through education, because that's important. But having that mindset and not letting what took place destroy them, because there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Jean-Paul. I think what we're speaking to is a mindset and ingrained beliefs as we work with our schools around our Legacy Lab Day and around the work that we do under the My Brother's Keeper initiative. One of the big questions that you have to our audience is, are leaders born or are leaders made? And if you believe that somebody is born to be a leader, and you think it's only the talented, as Dr. Skeet was speaking to, only the talented few, then we've missed an opportunity as a community, because we're not going to invest in our students. We're not going to see their potential. And so we have to shift our mindsets and just start with that basic question. When we work with our students with our Legacy Youth Journal, where with our Legacy Youth Journal, we talk to them about, what are your strengths, and how is it that a friend would describe you? Because that gets to what Ambassador Pursuit is speaking to, those traits. And I'm going to come back to you, Ambassador. I'm mindful of the time. I want to go back to, because as I reflect on this conversation and what I saw yesterday, and we know what it is. We know it's white supremacy. We know it's racism. I've traveled across this country. We don't just work, in New York and in these places. I've worked in places like North Dakota and across the Midwest. And when people say they didn't understand what is it, or they're surprised to have a Trump in the White House, they have to now begin to be very honest about the fact that education has flatlined in this country, and it's flatlined, of course, for white Americans. And so when you see individuals who truly are okay, right, with not reading the Constitution and not understanding those laws and the structures and things like that. And that's that privilege of everything is okay. And they know it's not. That's why we see so much of that anger. So I'm hopeful that as we look to our communities and as we look to what we do well is certainly in a place of love and a place of forgiveness, that we're able to now begin to say, what is it that we can offer the world next? Because Ambassador Pursue, you are absolutely right. We were able to get this country to, and this world to say, you can't have a slave economy and you can't have a democracy. But now as we look forward to moving forward, what does that look like? I'm mindful of the time. And so I wanna just kind of close down. I wanna ask, I don't see anyone sending me comments and questions from the audience. And so I want to kind of get this final question in, be mindful of the time. In order to do this, I always like to ask, success will take the courage to do what? If we're going to be successful in moving our nation forward, certainly, we are hopeful that yesterday's horrific events is the last as we look forward to moving forward, but I don't think so. I think that, we have to be honest about the fact that we have to begin to, to do the work. So Ambassador Pursue, I'll start with you. Success takes the courage to do what?
To do what is hard to do.
Okay.
The hard things to do. But if I may take a minute just quickly to just say something complimentary to what Derek was saying. When he talked about the need to pay attention to people at the middle and so forth. Let me just give you a personal story. I have 4 children. My first 2 children got into special program for gifted. When my 3rd child took the exam to get into that program, he fell short by 1 or 2 points. I went to the principal and I said, he's going into the program. She says, well, he failed by 1 or 2 points. I said, let me explain something to you. That you risking psychological damage to him. I don't give a damn about the 1 or 2 points. His brother and sister is not going to be treated one way, and because of 1 point on a score, on a test, you keep him out. That you risking psychological damage. And I'm not leaving your office until we settle this issue. They did allow him in the program upon my insistence. And guess what? Today, he is the most successful and has the greatest leadership qualities in all my children. He managed his success and his business leaps and bounds ahead of his sibling. And if I had not fought for him and allowed him to be psychologically damaged by telling him he's less than, and honestly, I think that was something great I did for him. Now, I just want to wrap up things quickly by saying, I also think that I look at our needs as a community. And with or without what happened yesterday, some of what I feel for Black communities still would have been the same. I think that we need, economics is important in this society, and we need to promote more Black businesses in our community. We need our children to grow up in community and experience Black ownership of people like themselves. We need also to build institutions that preserve our history and our culture, our African culture. We need that in our community. And finally, the last thing on the question of the international aspect, I don't think we need to pay much attention to them. We could laugh at them when they call us, when they refer to banana countries and third world countries, as if we are somehow inferior. They use this label to make us feel inferior, but it's not true. I've spoken to people across this world who told me they don't look to America for leadership in terms of democracy or politics. They don't. I was speaking to someone in Africa, in South Africa, and he says to me, American politics is not something that inspires us. I spoke to someone in Germany who said to me, America teach people to be smart, not intelligent. So in terms of America's image across the world, I don't think that we need to be concerned about that. I think that we just need to do the best we can. And if we want to lead, take care of business home. And as for Black folks in this country, I think we need to internationalize the Black struggle. We cannot sit here as a Black man and say that even if I'm treated badly in America, I'm still better than the Black man in Trinidad or in Jamaica. We need to realize that there's something common that we have, and let us get together. I think Malcolm X said it when Malcolm X went to the United Nations and said, internationalize the Black struggle. I think we need to listen to that Black people are struggling across the globe. And it is to our advantage to get together, identify some of the problems we have, and to come up with strategies to overcome them.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Pursu. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your expertise today. I so appreciated it. I'm going to go to Dr. Skeet next. I'm mindful of the time, and then I'll go to Dr. Jean-Paul. Dr. Skeet, success takes the courage to do what?
Put aside our differences and begin to work together. Now is not the time for settling scores. Now is the time for us to put our heads together, come up with solutions to some of the problems that we are faced with in our communities, and just get the work done.
Thank you, Dr. Skeet. And for those listening, you can find Dr. Skeet's book on Amazon. Thank you so much. And they could just search your name, correct, Dr. Skeet?
Yes, that's my name.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise today. Dr. Jean-Paul, success takes the courage to?
Success takes the courage to continue to be patient, reflective, and keep your eye on the goal by working together.
Thank you, Dr. Jean-Paul, and we thank you again for your leadership, and please extend our Happy New Year wishes to your entire school community, to the families and community that you serve in New York, as well as on an international level. For those who are joining us, we thank you on behalf of Partner with Legacy. Of course, you can find us at partnerwithlegacy.com. You can also find some of our student journals, the work that we do with our students around MBK. Also on Amazon, just look for Legacy Student Journal, Boys and Young Men of Color, Legacy Student Journal, Girls and Young Women of Color. I want to end with this invite to certainly invite you to come back with us for our future Legacy webinars and Legacy Ed News. We've planned a dynamic calendar for the year. We're going to do some things around STEM, around financial literacy. We will continue this conversation around education and issues of race as we look forward. I think success will take the courage to now ask for the money. I don't see us not being able to ask for the budget. And I think that if we don't have the courage right now to stand up and to say that it is, the Black vote that has put the Biden-Harris administration in office, and that, yes, we want to create a united America, but Black people have been left behind, and we do not have the resources. We send other people's kids to college, and when we see what happened yesterday, it was basically almost what people were saying, well, you didn't treat them like you treat the dogs of society. And that's what I felt, right? That you took dogs on us. And so we have to now be able to have the economics to be able to set an agenda for our young people and for our communities. And Ambassador Pursu, as you gave that example, it's advocacy, to have the courage to advocate for ourselves and for our children. So I am hopeful that we will have the courage to put the money where our mouth is, and to realize that budgets are moral documents and moral decisions. And we need now the money to educate our children, to keep them safe in schools in light of what we saw yesterday, and to now create a curriculum. So for those who are joining us, I want to just once again say thank you. We want to wish you a happy and prosperous new year. And please continue to stay safe, and continue to check on our loved ones, check on our neighbors, and check on our family. I thank you to the panel members and to the community.
Thank you.